Hello, my name is Grosen Friis, and I have a message for all people in the United Kingdom who can and are considering voting at the EU referendum here on June the 23rd. Jeg er ikke brite. Jeg er faktisk dansk statsborger, og som du sikkert ved, så ligger Danmark jo lige øst for Storbritannien, et af jeres nærmeste nabolande. What I just said was in Danish, and what I said is that I'm not British, that I am a citizen in Denmark. And as you might remember, Denmark is your close neighboring country to the east. The reason why I've decided to do this video is that at this referendum on June the 23rd, you're actually not just voting directly on your own behalf, for your country to be able to leave the European Union. You are actually also voting indirectly on my behalf and on behalf of many other people in other countries in the European Union, because if you vote to leave the European Union, you will, in my mind, you will without a doubt start a new movement where citizens in all other countries in the European Union, where they want to have similar referendums where they can vote and decide their own destiny. Should they stay in the EU or should they leave the EU? Now, I actually used to be pro-EU, but today I'm very much against EU, and there are many reasons for that. First of all, I think that the European Union is very undemocratic. For instance, the entire Commission, the chairman of the Commission and the EU President, they are not directly elected. They are indirectly selected instead. Another thing is that the European Parliament, that is probably the only parliament in the world where the parliament members themselves cannot propose legislation. The only body in the European Union that is allowed to propose new legislation, that's the undemocratic Commission. The only thing the European Parliament can do is they can either vote yes or no to the legislation proposed by the European Union Commission. In my country, Denmark, our national parliament, they do approximately 1,300 to 1,500 new laws and regulations each year. But it turns out that approximately 7 to 80% of all these new laws and regulations, they actually come from the EU. So what I think is happening is that the national parliament, they actually just ratify all the new rules and regulations that come from the European Union, more or less automatically. It's only the remaining 20 to 30% of the new laws and regulations that are actually made by our own national politicians. I used to believe that the European Union was a place where national countries they met, and here they negotiated ways to remove tariffs that limit trade between the European Union member countries, and also where they could negotiate to remove different technical barriers that can also put a limit to trade among the countries. But that's not what the EU is anymore. Actually, it has turned into a machine that tries to micromanage your life, every little detail of your life. Let me give you two examples. For instance, the European Union has decided that in order for you not to use too much electricity, well, your vacuum cleaner is not allowed to run on an engine that is more powerful than 900 watts. That actually makes vacuum cleaners less efficient. So I actually believe that now you spend more time vacuum cleaning your floors than you did before, because the engine of the vacuum cleaner is now limited to approximately 900 watts. Why is that limit necessary? You should be able to buy any vacuum cleaner you would like with as powerful an engine in the vacuum cleaner as you want to. Another thing is that, for instance, the European Union, they have put a maximum on the dangerous cinnamon. the maximum levels that food industries can put into, cinnamon that they can put into food. And that has actually resulted in my country that our food authorities, they actually conduct cinnamon raids against bakeries because they need to enforce the EU laws that says that you cannot put all that dangerous cinnamon into the food. The next part I should like to read to you, so that's why I'm looking away from the camera. How the EU spends their funds, paid for by the EU member nations, suffer from very poor oversight. For example, back in 2013 the EU budget was approximately £117 billion. However, £109 billion of the £117 billion, they are spent with what's called material error. Let me give you two examples. For example, a bizarre EU project to fly Belgians to Burkina Faso to teach Africans how to dance. That is part of the EU's £10 billion annual aid program. The second example is that there is a lack of measuring if the EU spended money. The EU spended money is actually ending up with the expected results. So the EU, they spend billions and billions of pounds on different projects, and they forget to measure if they actually end up with the wanted results. Now actually the EU is so bad at controlling their spending that the EU Court of Auditors, they have refused to sign off the overall accounts and budgets of the European Union for the past 20 years. Now the European Union, they want all member nations to use the European currency, the euro. Luckily, you in the UK, you still got your own national currency, the pound, and luckily we here in Denmark, we still have the Danish krone as our national currency. However, in all the countries that are using the euro, you clearly see that it cannot function in countries that are so different, and you end up with situations like the catastrophic economic conditions in a country like Greece. And the construction of the euro is one of the primary reasons why Greece has ended up being in such a poor economic state that they are today. Now, you cannot introduce a single currency to be used in countries that are so different culturally, so different in their technological and economically development, that are so different in their level of industrialization, and that are so different in, for instance, their national debt level according to their GDP. Now the EU border system is the Schengen Agreement, and that has totally collapsed. The outer borders of the European Union is not protected, and the millions and millions of refugees and migrants, primarily from Muslim countries in Africa and in, for instance, Syria, well, they show that since they have been able to come into the European Union, well, that shows that the Schengen border system has collapsed, because they are not outside our borders. They have very easily been able to flood across our borders. Now, many of these millions of people, they are not refugees, they are economic migrants. And the reason why I have no doubt about that is that it's not women, children and old people that are the most part of all these millions of refugees. Women, children and old people that flee from war. No, instead it's in most parts young men that come into Europe. Actually, if it is war that they are fleeing from, the men should actually stay back and fight a tyrannical government, a dictator, and the women and the children, the old people, they were the ones who would be sent away into Europe for peace until peace has been reached in their own countries. Another thing that shows that many of these new people that come into the European Union countries, that they are actually economic migrants, well, they don't just stay in the first country, in the southern European countries that they come into, happy from being able to flee and get away from war. No, they move on and they travel up into the richer northern European European Union countries like your country, the UK, like Germany, like the Netherlands, and like my country, Denmark, and also like Sweden. And the reason is that these countries, they function as a magnet because they have the economic welfare system that are the highest, and these welfare systems and programs, the welfare migrants, they want to apply to those welfare programs. I actually believe that the plan for the European Union is controlled by elitists and globalists. I believe that the goal is not about free trade among sovereign nation states. The goal is to wash away the nation states, wash away languages, wash away cultural differences, and instead make my country to a municipality in EU Region North, and where we have one single European government and one single European currency. Deciding our lives, and instead of that we remain in our smaller nation countries. I don't want that development. I want to go back to a system where sovereign nations, they can negotiate free trade among each other and live peacefully among each other. I do not want my country to be washed away and replaced by a big United States of Europe. So I am a boring, ordinary, grey, dry, middle-class man in a different country. I'm not a citizen in the UK. And my message to you is that please, at the referendum at June the 23rd, please consider voting Leave the EU. Remember, as I said in the beginning of the video, you don't just vote for your own direct possibility to leave the European Union. You're also indirectly voting on my behalf, that I might in the future be able to also vote that my country, Denmark, can leave the European Union as well. And I would very, very much like to see that happen in my lifetime. If you vote to stay in the EU, I don't think you will ever get that chance again, and you will also close the door for similar referendums in the other European Union member countries. And as a final comment, please beware of a huge amount of scare tactics that you'll see in the media the closer you get to the day of the referendum. And the scare tactics will say that hell will break loose if the UK leaves the European Union. I don't believe that to be true whatsoever. Another thing that I also think that you should be very aware of and very concerned about is the possibility of voting fraud. Should the polls show bigger and bigger support for voting Leave EU, there is a huge risk that the globalists, that the elitists, will actually conduct voting fraud so that the UK will remain in the European Union. They do not want the European Union to fall apart and split up and once again let Europe be an area that consists of sovereign nations. And finally, I should like to thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. For June the 23rd election, I cross my fingers and I pray to God that we will see Brexit.